my presentation does not have to take too long. I want to make sure that everyone's aware of things that have happened since the 2019 users conference in terms of Barracuda releases and features, because I know I live in the Barracuda world every single day, so I'm like, everyone must know about that feature. But sometimes I talk to customers that were like, oh, I had no idea that was the thing now. And also talk a little bit about our academic starter program, updates to training in case you haven't attended a Barracuda training in a while. It looks a lot different now in this COVID and post-COVID world. And then also a few updates from the support team. So since the 2019 users conference, at that point our current release was 17.4. We numbered our releases in what seemed like kind of a random fashion, so we decided, okay, let's start doing what other kind of software distribution type of companies and organizations do, start naming the releases after the year at which they were released. So you'll see that going forward, 20.0, 20.1, and so forth. We're aiming for 2 releases per year. This has turned out to be a good pace of development for us. So hopefully we'll be able to release a 0.0 in April of each year or May, and then a 0.1 in October or November. So this is kind of like Jim was talking about earlier. Hopefully that bubbles capability will come out this October, November. And so hopefully we'll be able to keep that up pretty regularly. You know when to expect a new version, and that'll just make things a little bit more predictable. With every release of Barracuda, we do spend a bit of time writing the release guide so that when you get a new version, you can always go through this chapter. It's included in the user manual. It talks about what are all the new features, how do I use them, what's the purpose of this feature. So just make sure and take a look at that. That's kind of the easiest way to get a good idea of what is in each new release. And if you need to go back to a previous release guide, you can always open that version of the Barracuda GUI, open the user manual that's included with that, and see the release guide for that release as well. Related to that, we've started to do release webinars for each release. And so in this one, I read the release guide to you, and it's very entertaining. And so each of those is also on our website. You can always go to the webinars section, and we've been naming them Getting Started with Virtual Reactor 20.1 or 21.1. So those are all available as well in case you missed something that was in a previous release. Some of the big features that have been released since 2019, one that we're really excited about, TechPlot for Barracuda. If, as any of you who have known me for a long time, I started in 2008 with CPFD. GMV was my longtime friend. I really loved GMV. I could do all kinds of neat tricks with it, but it was an old man. And it was not working well on Windows. It was not working well even on newer versions of Linux. So we kind of had to do something different. And the partnership with TechPlot has been great. The support team there is great, and Scott and his team have helped us to come up to speed with TechPlot and really do some cool things that we were not able to do at all in the days of GMV. Some of the really nice things about this, both Windows and Linux are fully supported, so this is much better than in the GMV world where Windows got really tough. You can script it with its own macro language or with Python, and then it's also integrated with Barracuda as a product with buttons in the Barracuda GUI, so you click View Setup and it opens the correct view in TechPlot, or you do View Results and it opens the correct view. One thing about TechPlot for Barracuda is that it is customized a little bit compared to full TechPlot. So we do have the Load Barracuda Data dialog, which is specifically designed for loading the 3D data and the text file data from Barracuda. And then we also have a bunch of stuff in the quick macro panel that's customized for making post-processing Barracuda results as easy as possible. So that is some work that our development team has done to try to make that work as well as possible. Another new thing that did not exist back in the 2019 users conference time was RLM Cloud. So if you're not familiar with this, you may want to become familiar with it because it does make your life a lot easier. And I spend a lot of time supporting people with like Reprise License Manager installation. And if you can go to the cloud part, this can make your life a bit simpler, where you don't have to have your own on-premise RLM server. And so you don't have to worry about maintaining that server. It doesn't matter if your server dies. You just don't run into any of those problems anymore. And so if you have a network that's always on and always connected to the internet, then this can be a really nice option where we just send you a cloud license file. You put it on any of your client machines, you point them all to the cloud, and you get your licenses that way. And this really does enable running on like Azure or AWS or other cloud providers. Makes it much easier because you don't have to worry about setting up an RLM server to run on those. A few other things that this enables, one of them is metered licenses. And so, as Peter pointed out, everyone attending this conference gets a 500-hour certificate for metered licenses, and these are really nice and flexible, where if you want to run 5 simulations all at the same time, you can do that. Or if you want to run one simulation and use like 4 GPU license tokens, you can do that and just draw down the meter at the rate of the license tokens that you're using. So that can be a really nice and flexible way to try out multi-GPU or to get a bunch of work done as quickly as possible. If you just need to run like 10 simulations all at once, you can do that sort of thing. It also makes it very easy to add short-term licenses. You know, from our perspective, we can put licenses on these RLM cloud servers very quickly, so we can be very responsive with those. The metered license specifically is interesting, and so and this is a new thing, right? This hasn't really been officially supported. If you're running a version 21.0.1 or newer, you can immediately use your metered license certificate. If not, you'll have to install at least that version or newer. So I would recommend just going all the way for 22 if you haven't installed that yet. But basically, your certificate is 500 hours of solver, 500 hours of chemistry, and 500 hours of GPU, and each of those draws down independently. So if you're using 2 GPUs, that'll draw down twice as fast as if you were using 1 GPU, even with a single simulation going. And the other nice thing about this is you can mix and match these with the regular floating license. So when I say floating, that's like what everyone typically has is a license that can be served to any networked computer. So you can do that, and you can add a metered license. And when you do this, when you get to the point of installing your metered license, what most people tend to do is they put their licenses in this order in the Barracuda GUI, where you do like your on-premise one or your floating license on RLM Cloud first, and then usually people want to do the metered license after that. So that way you're pulling from your regular lease license, and then for the extra GPU tokens that you want or for the extra simulations that you want to run, those ones check out their license after your main license has been checked out. So you're just kind of minimizing the amount that you're drawing down on the meter. As we've talked about a lot this week, the other really big thing that's come along since 2019 is multi-GPU acceleration. And this really has been a game changer. As Jim mentioned earlier, in past versions of Barracuda, you were basically limited to the size of your GPU. But now, even if your simulation is larger than the GPU's memory, you can still run it, right? There's a penalty hit because you do have to transfer more data on and off of a small GPU, but it's possible to do. And then this also opened up the capability of running on more than one GPU, so you can get that extra acceleration. This is supported on Linux only. From a technical perspective, the Windows OS just doesn't work with the multiple GPU code, and it does require 1 GPU license per GPU that you're using, right? So if you want to run on 2 GPUs, you have to have 2 GPU licenses checked out for that simulation. We've seen really amazing speed ups in light of this. As As Ahmed talked about earlier, we've seen something like 500x, and bigger simulations do tend to benefit more from the multi-GPU acceleration. So if you're running something with less than maybe 10 million clouds, you're probably going to get the best performance on 1 or 2 GPUs. And if you go to 3 or 4 GPUs, it could potentially run slower because there's that extra communication happening. So just be aware of that. Like don't always assume that you should throw 4 GPUs at every single problem. You kind of do need to have enough work to keep all the GPUs busy. Over the past 2 or 3 years, we've also had a lot of improved physics models for people who are running really high temperature reacting simulations. If you're not aware of the P1 radiation model, this is a really good radiation model that's an improvement over our previously available one that was called, it used to be called just radiation model, but now we've clarified that. It really is kind of the near wall radiation model where it's only looking at heat transfer within a couple of cells within the wall. But the P1 radiation model does radiation transfer throughout the domain with no restriction on the proximity to the wall. Other things that have been added, thermal baffles. So now if you have baffles within the bed, they can act as heat transfer surfaces, just like thermal walls, where you can set a temperature, and those can participate in convective or radiation heat transfer. And then with version 22, as Jim was talking about earlier, a lot of improvements for liquid phase simulations. And I know some users have been simulating liquid systems for a long time, but with 22, you can now put multiple liquids in the domain of the simulation. The stability has been improved. The liquids can participate in chemistry. So just a lot of kind of core improvements to incompressible simulation capabilities. And then also the evaporation model. So I know a lot of users have been using kind of either the beta mode evaporation model for a long time or chemistry-based evaporation approaches, which are valid, but the new evaporation model is very fast and stable and makes that much easier if you have evaporation that's important in your system. Peter mentioned this briefly during his introduction talk, but I just want to give people one more idea of what this is. So CPFD is announcing an academic starter program, and the goal of this is to try to get universities easier access to Barracuda, especially if they don't have funding immediately available, which seems to often be the case for universities. So this allows people to access all of the physics capabilities of Virtual Reactor. And you have to apply to this program, right? So for anyone who's in the room involved with the university or watching Zoom, if you're interested in this, please contact our sales team. There are some limitations to this version of Barracuda. You're limited to 100,000 real cells, and you can't do parallel computing, which would include CPU and GPU parallel. So it's limited to kind of small models. You're not going to get to take advantage of all the GPU acceleration that we're talking about. But it could be really good for people who are doing, say, like a course on fluidization and want to have their students learn about it, or they want to do some demonstrations or projects within the course. So that's kind of the idea behind it, and we're just starting to get this rolled out. And hopefully this will bring Barracuda even more into the academic world. One thing that my team has been working on a bit over the past couple years is online training. And so historically, when people wanted to learn how to use Barracuda, they would fly to the CPFD office. We would spend like 4 days with them in person, teaching them how to use Barracuda, and it was great, right? We really got to know people, and we really got to talk about their projects. But when COVID came along, this was no longer an option. So we said, okay, we got to figure out how to do online training, and we got to do it fast. So we found a nice web-based kind of platform that we could use and kind of walk people through the same Barracuda training material, and actually in a much more efficient way. No travel is required, and you can get through this training now in about probably 12 hours of total time over the course of 4 days. Is what we've been doing. So you still get to walk through all of the same training examples, and projects that we've done in the past, but all of my lectures are shorter because I wrote them down and what do I want to say, and we say them, and so they're all scripted and concise, and I don't babble as much as I do live. So you get the important parts of the lecture. And so all of those lecture parts are there, all of the exercises are there. This is available to anyone who has a support site account. So if you want to sign up for a training class and be there with us, like through GoToMeeting is the platform that we use, then by all means contact us. We can sign you up for an in-person web-based class. Or if you ever want to go through this on your own, it's available on our website all the time. And we keep this updated with each release of the code as well. So if something changes significantly in the Barracuda GUI, we'll go and we'll update those parts of the training to keep up. The whole CPFD website was updated probably about a year ago. Peter mentioned this a little bit earlier as well. We have an events calendar where we try to put all of the things that are going on that could be of interest to everyone. We have a resource finder that I tend to use a lot. If someone emails me and says, hey, has anyone ever written a paper about Barracuda in this type of system? A lot of times the first thing I'll do is I'll go search here and I'll see what comes up for a given topic. And so we try to put all of the papers that our customers are writing, all of the papers that we're writing, to make it a good resource so you can, if you're looking for something that's Barracuda specific, hopefully you can always find it here. We also have a library of videos and webinars and things like that. The other thing that we've put a lot of effort into is when you go to the dashboard of this website, which is really what I call the support site, when you go to that dashboard, you should be able to now quickly find the latest version of Barracuda, so you can download that directly. Oh yeah, and what this is showing is that you can kind of filter by industry on that resource finder. So here you can always download the latest version, and then we have a couple of these big buttons here that are Tech Plot for Barracuda training videos, and how to create CAD for Barracuda training videos. And so when we made the transition to TechPlot, we had to learn how to use TechPlot, right? We were so entrenched in the GMV world that it was a whole new learning experience for us. So as our team was learning how to do all of the things that we needed to do, we tried to just create videos so that we could share that information with everyone as well. The other thing that's really changed over the past few years is we haven't really been able to visit anyone in person. So a lot of our support has turned into video meetings, which has actually been awesome, right? Like if you're having a problem, send us an email, and a lot of times our response might be, hey, are you available right now? Let's jump on a web call. We can share a screen. We can try to dig into whatever you're looking at, and a lot of times we can get things pretty efficiently worked out without a whole lot of email back and forth. So that's another thing that's kind of changed. Okay, well, those are the things I wanted to point out just to make sure that everyone's aware of what has happened over the past 3 years, just in case you missed a specific release or a specific feature. So yeah, if you have any questions, happy to answer them, and I'll also invite Jim and Peter up here, and that way we can answer any other questions that people might be holding in.